Okay, good morning. Today is August 21st, 2018, as you've written in your notebook. And you should have also written down the learning goal. Today's learning goal says, I can explain the 8 math practice standards. But before we get into that, let's talk about the problem of the day. Okay, it says a museum guide provides 10 brochures telling about the museum's history to each tourist group. So one group, if only one group comes, how many brochures do they need to use? 10, right? Let's say the purple table is one group. How many brochures do they get? 10. The blue table is another tourist group. They get 10 brochures. How many does the blue table get?
10.
Altogether, how many brochures were used for the blue table and for the purple table?
20.
Terrific. Now it says, if 12 groups visited today, how many brochures were distributed? Well, we know we don't need to write down the entire question or the entire problem. We just have to write down what the question's asking. So, Martha, what's the question asking us to find?
If 12 groups visited today, how many
Pause. If 12 groups visited today, is that part of the question? Let's be even more specific. Really narrow it down to just the question. Try it again.
How many brochures were distributed?
You got it. For step 1, all you needed to write down was how many brochures were distributed. What Samar said earlier, that's part of step 2, isn't it, Tarun?
Yep.
What's step 2?
Step 2.
We need to write down the important information, which is
10 brochures.
10 brochures per group. Okay, and
And 12 groups visited.
12 groups visited. Very good. So if only one group visited, how many brochures would we need?
10.
If 2 groups visited, how many would we need?
20.
3 groups?
30.
4 groups?
40.
6 groups?
60.
12 groups. And so for step 3, you could show 10 times 12, because we need 12 groups of 10 brochures, is 120. Now, if you only wrote 120, Miss O would say, sorry, that's wrong, because is it 120 goldfish, 120 cupcakes, $120, 120 crumbs? It's 120. Very good, brochures. It's super important. And you're going to hear me say this all year long to label our answers so that we know what we're talking about. Okay? Very good. This picture here is the math section of your report card. You'll see that there's 2 areas where you can get grades. One simply says mathematics, and one says mathematical practices or math practices. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what those mean. So when we think about math, there's 2 aspects of math. Okay, one is the content. That's all the stuff you learn. That's like learning how to add numbers, how to subtract numbers, how to divide numbers, how to multiply numbers. It's like learning about fractions or decimals. It's like learning about solving for x, like Aradhana likes to do. It's geometry and algebra and solving math puzzles and answering math questions, word problems. That's all stuff you learn how to do in math. Yes? Do you agree? That's what we call the math content. That's learning what to do in math. We can think of content like the what you learn how to do. Okay? On the other hand, though, there's math practice standards. Did you guys see that on the report card too? How there's the math part and then there's the practice part? Math practices is like how you think about math. Are you someone who's able to figure out a hard question and persevere and work through obstacles? Are you someone who's able to use patterns? It's how you think about math. So if the content is what you do about math or what you know how to do in math, the math practice standards are how you do math. And so not only do you get a report card grade about what you know how to do in math, as you've noticed now, you also get a grade about how you do math. Okay? And so if you want to learn how to get good grades on that part, don't we need to understand what the different math practice standards are? Right? In order to be good at something, you need to understand what it is. And so today's math lesson is all about learning about these different math practice standards. Based on what you wrote in your learning goal, how many math practice standards are there? 8. Okay. So we're going to take some time right now to learn about all 8 math practice standards. The first math practice standard says, I can make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. That's kind of like a teacher way of saying things or an adult way of saying things. What's the easier way to what does that really mean? Well, it means, when there's a hard math problem, I can try, even if I don't get it on the first time, I can try many times to understand and to solve a problem. Even when I run into something that's hard, I keep trying. That word persevere means even when something is hard, I keep trying. Okay? So once again, math practice standard number 2, it sounds fancy, reason abstractly and quantitatively, but all that really means is I can think about math in my head and I can understand how to change words into thinking about it using numbers, into math equations. Make sense? Math practice standard number 3 says, okay, it sounds fancy again. It says I can construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. It sounds fancy. All it really means is I can make and explain a math plan called a strategy, and then I can talk about that plan with other people. Like I can explain my thinking. Once I solve a math problem, I can explain how I solved it and why I did it that way. This one says I can model with mathematics. Well, what that really means is I can use math symbols and numbers to solve the problem. So again, in our problem of the day, step 3 says I can use numbers, words, and pictures. I know that we just said the words was math practice number 3. What is this one?
Pictures.
Or numbers. Yeah, I can take a word problem and figure out what the numbers are that I should use. Okay, pictures also is good to use for this one too. I would add, if it's not on your blue paper, I want you to write the word pictures too. Math practice standard number 5 says I can use appropriate tools strategically. Do you think that means, okay, I need to take out my hammer now, and my screwdriver, and my saw? Nah. It means I can use math tools such as pictures, drawings, or objects to help me solve the problem. Like if I need to use a ruler, or a protractor, or a compass, or if I need to draw a picture to help me model the problem. Okay, so this is the one really where the pictures come into play as well. Okay. Math practice number 6. This is a big one. I can attend to precision. Attend means pay attention to. So what this really means is I can check my work to make sure my calculations are correct. Before I turn in my math paper, before I turn in my test, before I finish and click submit, I can double check my work to see if I made any careless errors. How many of you ever made careless errors on your math test and when you got it back you're like, I said 1 + 3 = 5. Oh man, that's why I made a mistake. That's not attending to precision, right? We all can be careless sometimes, but if we pay attention to or attend to precision, we can catch those mistakes before we turn our papers in. Okay. Math practice number 7 says I can look for and make use of structure. What this means is, you guys are already experts in lots of ways of math. You already have 4 whole grades, including kindergarten, 5 whole grades of math behind you. You can use what you already know about math to solve the problem. I'm going to tell you guys a secret. You guys ready? 5th grade math is the same as 4th grade math. Did you guys learn fractions in 4th grade math? Yes. Decimals? Yes. Did you guys learn how to multiply? Yes. Add? Yes. Divide? Yes. Subtract? Yes. Graph? Did you guys learn how to make graphs sometimes? Yes. You guys, that's all we're doing in math in 5th grade. It's exactly the same, except it goes harder, right? We go deeper. We go to a harder level. So are you learning any skills for the first time in 5th grade math? No. You're using what you already know and adding on. Okay, so math is kind of like when you play video games. Is the first level really hard? No. Sometimes it's really boring and you just want to get through it really fast, right? But as the levels get harder and harder, you're adding on to the skills you already know from the earlier levels and it's getting harder and harder. Okay, that's what math is. And that's why one of the math practice standards is taking what you already know to solve newer and harder problems. Last, math practice standard number 8 says I can look for and express regularity. That means noticing patterns in repeated reasoning. If you solved a problem, let's say you solved problem number 1 a certain way, and problem number 3 is exactly the same, just with different numbers, are you able to take the strategies you used for problem number 1 and use it for problem number 3? That's what that means. It means I can use a strategy I used already to solve another math problem. It means that you can recognize that different problems can be solved the same way, using the same strategies.